place um, for the workshop today on consumption lounges. This will be the first workshop that we host. I appreciate the flexibility. We're starting about 15 minutes late. We had a long board meeting this morning, so I appreciate you all being in the room today. I will note that we have Member Young, Member Merritt um, joining us through Zoom. And we have Member Durrett, if she has not joined yet, will join shortly by Zoom. So appreciate board members for joining us today. Before we get started, I just want to talk about a couple things here, lay kind of some run of the show details. As I mentioned, this will be the first workshop, which means we're going to have at least another workshop on consumption lounges. Obviously, there's a lot here. Look forward to hearing your feedback today. So today's very much going to be a listening session, right? So I want to hear from you. We've got a lot of comments that were submitted prior to the start of today. Certainly appreciate those. I believe they're already posted online, and any more that we receive either during the meeting or after the meeting, we'll post those online as well. There's a lot of good questions. There's a lot of good requests for clarification in these comments. So those are things that we'll be able to take after today and provide some of the clarification where necessary. So feel free to put those questions or requests on the record today if you so wish, submit them in writing. But we will take those and go ahead and provide any kind of clarification that's needed for the next workshop, which, depending on today, will probably be sometime in January, given what we get back today. So these regulations were drafted by staff and with participation by the Cannabis Compliance Board. We also took into consideration the recommendations that the Cannabis Advisory Commission sent to the board, and certainly appreciate all the work that the Advisory Commission did through the subcommittees and the commission itself to help us and assist in the drafting of these. We were also able to share these with local jurisdictions across the state. We received great feedback from the local jurisdictions. We also received great written feedback that is part of the record today from some of our local jurisdictions. So really appreciate that as well. We're going to take today in two parts. Obviously, the regulations are broken up into the application regulations and then the regulations around operations. And so that's how we'll take them today. Deputy Director Miles is going to go through each regulation. So you're looking at the letters on the agenda. And after he goes through the entirety of each regulation listed, then we'll open it up for members of the public here to provide any kind of feedback, any kind of request for clarification. We will not get into back and forth. Today, I said it's very much a listening session, but we want those questions so we can have them. We may ask you, though, to provide further context to what you're talking about. Because again, we want to have this be a very open and transparent process. So with that, unless I missed anything, I do want to thank my staff, though, led by Deputy Director Miles and all of our staff, those who aren't even up here for their work in putting these regulations together. They're very comprehensive. They did it very quickly, and so really appreciate where we're at here today. So with that, we can move on to agenda item number 1. This is general public comment. Again, there'll be a public comment period after each regulation, but we will start and end the workshop with a general public comment period. So with that, I will open it up to anyone here in Las Vegas who wishes to provide general public comment. Please state your name for the record, and please keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less.
Good afternoon, Amanda Connor for the record. I have just a general comment. First, I wanted to thank staff and the board for working diligently on these regulations. I know there were several subcommittees that considered various issues. I would be remiss if I didn't come up and make a general public comment that as a cannabis attorney advising numerous people in the industry, I would ask that the board take consideration that these regulations still need work. There is a lot, especially going into lounges, that seems to not be addressed in these regulations, that as an attorney advising clients on what they can and cannot do, what would be permissible, is just not addressed yet in those regulations. I would encourage the industry to make sure they're providing feedback to the board so that the board is aware of those issues and to make sure they're addressed. I know everyone's working diligently and I look forward to seeing further drafts. I just do think we all need to recognize that this is, the beginning attempts of regulation and we still need some further refinement and work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon, Scott Rutledge, for the record, with our Gentum partners here on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. Wanted to echo Ms. Connor's statement about the work that's been done. We know this has been a very quick process. It feels like it was just the legislative session yesterday, and the next one will be up pretty soon. So understanding we're trying to get a lot of work done over the next few months. Just on behalf of the Chamber and its members, we do really appreciate the thought that's gone into this. We certainly have recognized a few things that need to be addressed. We were kind of hoping today would be a chance to hear from some of the other groups and attorneys, et cetera. And then also, thank you for focusing on the diversity component as it relates to the applications, specifically for the lounges. I know something that we discussed a lot during the legislative session, and we know that it's a charge of this board and the state to look at that. And the Chamber does represent probably one of the most diverse memberships in the state. And so thank you for that. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and we look forward to commenting further.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lake Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Dispensary Association. First, I want to thank the board, the Cannabis Advisory Commission, and board staff for all the work that went into these proposed regulations. Director Klimas, you encouraged the industry to provide input on these regulations, and I believe that we can deliver. The NDA provided extensive written comments that we hope you'll take into consideration. In addition, I wanted to highlight the consumption lounge survey that the NDA undertook at the request of Assemblyman Steve Yeager. Assemblyman Yeager was concerned that the voice of end users of consumption lounges, the consumers, was missing from the regulatory process. So we surveyed nearly 500 consumers this month using a survey that we circulated online and via a QR code at dispensaries. We provided a summary of those survey results attached to our public comment, but if you are missing that or if anybody needs additional copies, we're happy to provide those. Additionally, I wanted to briefly address the significant changes to the application process in the proposed regulations. And as we state in our written comments, but I want to highlight here, those sweeping changes are pretty significant. And we believe that there's no need to rush those if you want to apply them just to the lounge process only, and maybe hold off and evaluate before applying them to all future licensing rounds for all cannabis establishments. As you know, there's a subcommittee of the Cannabis Advisory Commission dedicated to the cannabis industry and market stability, which could be tasked with making recommendations to the board on changes to the application process. This would allow for more comprehensive policy discussions related to these significant changes in the application licensing process. So thank you again for the opportunity to provide comment and your attention to these concerns.
Thank you.
Hello, Chris Anderson on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. We submitted some public comment via email last night. It's unfortunate that that kind of forum doesn't really lend itself to pointing out things that we think are great and appropriate about the regulations, because much of it is. So apologies for that on the front end. But we really hope that this body will approach these regulations as the opportunity that it is to provide hundreds, if not thousands, of good paying jobs in the industry, and allow for some really world-class entertainment concepts that we hope will have flexibility to deliver in the state of Nevada. So we appreciate your willingness to take a lot of feedback from the industry, and we certainly plan on continuing to provide that feedback in this process. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Hey, good morning. My name is Kamisha Monica. I'm with the Las Vegas Tribune. I'm not sure if you heard of Rolando Larraz, but he has given me the task of understanding what's going on with marijuana and where you're going and what the direction is and being able to report on that. So I hope to be of assistance to the people in the audience as well as you in understanding and writing about the compliances. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in Las Vegas? I promise there'll be plenty more opportunity to provide comments. Is there anyone in Carson City who wishes to provide public comment in the first public comment period?
I know, right? A little echoey up here. So, hello, I'm back. Will Adler, returning,
And
representing White
Mr.
Pine
Adler,
County.
sorry to interrupt you. It's not you, it's our speakers, and it happened at the board meeting. If you could just get as close to that mic, no, as close as you can to that mic. We just have a little trouble hearing you, please.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Will Adler, representing White Pine County through Silver State Government Relations here. But generally, we would like to, reach out from White Pine County and thank the CCB for taking on the issue of creating a regulatory mechanism to do new licensing rounds. White Pine County, as well as other counties, have reached out to the CCB prior and asked for a mechanism to do new licensing rounds because their county, as well as some others, had opportunities in the past to do licensing, did not do that, and then effectively are in a semi-moratorium, despite their current desire to have cannabis licenses. They're unable to do so because no new can be issued to counties that previously denied any licensing. So, in particular, it's thoughtful to go forward and not just have a mechanism that regs for a lounge licensing, but this will be licensing, regulations for all licenses going forward. And specifically, White Pine County, I'd like to say they've had applications and interest from cultivation, production, and dispensary candidates now that they previously could not operate with their regulations, but they've now changed that as of October 13th and are looking forward to having conversations in 2021 about how to get a license around those. They will be submitting a petition directly to the CCB board itself, and through that petition process, hopefully they'll indicate what regulatory changes they want to make to stimulate this more directly. So again, thank you for taking part in this. Thank you, staff, for doing the time to have these applications processes and these windows reopened to have new licensing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in Carson City wishing to provide public comment?
I see no more public comment.
Okay, thank you. So with that, then we'll go ahead and get started. We'll move to agenda item number 2. This is the proposed amendments to the NCCR as it relates to lounges, more specifically as it relates to the applications. As I mentioned, Deputy Director Miles will go through each regulation. So that's the letter coded on your agenda. And then we'll open it back up to any public comments. Please obviously keep those comments germane to the regulation that we discussed. So with that, Deputy Director Miles, whenever you're ready, you can get started.
Definition of regulation, which is NCCR Regulation 1. We made 4 additions to the application regs in NCCR Regulation 1. First one is address. As part of the application.
Sorry to interrupt. We can't hear in Carson City.
The applicant will be located in, at least for the initial part of the application. Again, we can put warnings on it and understand that whatever local jurisdiction you set based on.
Excuse me, this is
Based on,
Deputy Miles, your
I think she got
microphone
it
was
now.
not
Yeah.
on.
You could start, you maybe want to start over.
Sorry about that, I didn't have it on. Again, we're starting off with NCCR 1, the definition regulation. We're starting off with address, and as part of the application, address is required by statute, but we're clarifying that the CCB is only looking for the local jurisdiction that the applicant will be located in, at least for the initial part of the application. Again, there'll be a warning accompanying this to let you know that once you pick your local jurisdiction based on statute, that is where you must remain. There's no avenue for changing local jurisdictions within the statutes. The remainder of the changes only clarified terms used later. It is a board member, officer, and owner, and mostly we're updating this to include ownership as the important part of it, rather than just being a board member, officer, or again, as an owner. Do we have any questions from the board on these changes to the regulations? Okay. Do we have any public comments on the definition section of Reg 1, just for the application process? All right, I'll move on. Oh, we keep bringing back Chris.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is Marla McDade Williams with Strategies 360. Apologize, I'm having trouble following and whether or not you're talking about just all of 1 or all through 5. I think this applies broadly to number 1. We believe that the regulations violate NRS 678B 280, which requires the board to enact regulations related to the criteria of merit. Again, I don't know in the scope of things, I don't have my number to know how it corresponds with what you just said. I may be jumping the gun there.
Any more public comment in Carson City?
I
Again,
see
since I
none.
didn't say it, any more public comment here in Las Vegas? Again, just for the definition section of the application process. Okay, we'll move on to NCCR Regulation 5. These are the changes to
Excuse me, sir. Do you mind?
under just the definition section.
Yeah, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about the 4 definitions: address, board member, officer, owner. You were addressing all of 1, yes?
No, we were just addressing those that you're talking about, the address, board member.
Okay.
Now we're just getting started on 5. And now we'll start on NCCR Regulation 5. Again, these first 4 in letter red, these are just changing the titles of the regs that we're going to go into later. First, 5.040. 5.040 details the requirements on submitting the application, how the application is to be submitted, the number of applications that can be submitted, the importance of filing timely, and instructions on how to solicit answers to questions potential applicants may have regarding the license process. It goes on to detail the random number generator process, which will be used in the event of limits on available licenses. It further lists out individual requirements to be submitted initially as part of an application. There is language that clarifies the intent of AB 341 in limiting the number of lounge licenses to 1 per person that owns over 5% of any entity. The restriction extends to the number of applications that may be submitted, as well as to prevent application stacking, as it is referred to. Also, 5.040 details information around diversity applicants. In order to be considered as a diversity applicant, you must become certified by one of the certifying agencies approved by the board. We encourage individuals to apply quickly. This also assumes that the 5.045, the diversity certifying entity process, will be approved by the board at the next board meeting. Once an applicant receives a prospective, and you know what, let me stop this real quick. The process in this is we're going to have, everybody's going to be able to fill out an application. It's going to be more than likely located on the Acela portal. It's going to be our application portal. We're going to use a random number generator to draw a certain number of applicants. Again, it'll be 10 individual, 10 social equity applicants. Once you're drawn and your application has been drawn by the random number generator, you'll then be considered to have a prospective license. A letter will be sent out letting you know that you have been selected and you can continue on with the process. Once that happens, assuming that happens and you're one of the 20 people that were selected, there's a long list of documents to provide, and you're going to be contacted by our investigative services that will be going into a suitability analysis of you and your business to run a cannabis establishment entity. This process is going to take a little while, but once you're through this process, you're going to make an appearance in front of the board. You're going to actually submit your case to the board of why you should be licensed, as well as any recommendations from our investigative agents to the board. Assuming you pass the suitability analysis, then you'll be granted a conditional license. At that point, you'll have a conditional license. Then you can move forward with, as it's set out right now, once you have a conditional license, you have 12 months to get a final license. That includes the build out, getting everything ready, going through all the local jurisdiction requirements. And once you're through all that, and you get past inspections of the local jurisdictions as well as our agents, you will be granted a final license. And I just wanted to point out I'm going to go into a little more detail, but again, I just want to say prospective, conditional, and then final. All right. I'm going to step back a little again. Once an applicant receives a prospective license, the regulation details what must be submitted within 30 days so that the board can proceed with the suitability determination. And again, it's a long list of documents. There are additional requirements listed here as part of the social equity applicant submission, particularly as it relates to residency requirements. There's a long list of them. These requirements and documents are taken straight from the DMV on what they, on their requirements to prove residency in a certain area. Finally, consistent with how we are dealing with conditional licenses currently, clarification that the licensee, once issued a conditional license, has 12 months to become operational. We received positive feedback from local governments regarding this specific proposed language. Can we go through all before we? Can we go through all before we do public comment? I mean, because this is a big one, so you want to.
Have we talked about the social equity part of this?
No, that's 5.055. I was saying, do you want me to break this particular regulation down on its own because it is a large regulation?
Sure, if you'd like to. Now, 5055 is part of the application regulation.
Correct, but 5.040 is the.
Got it. Understood.
I'm just talking about 5.040.
Sure.
All right. As to regulation 5.040, do we have any questions from the board?
I have a question. This is Member Drett, and it might not be this regulation. I'm sorry. I think it is the one you just went over. What are the when it comes to finding of determination of suitability? What are the factors that are going to go into that?
There's
like
an entire list of docs plus investigation interviews, background checks. I can read through all the docs, but it's under 2A.
So like financial suitability
18.
would be one of them, right? And
correct.
And like business experience.
Yeah, experience, the operating procedures consistent with the NCCRs, their life experience, their education, the experience of key personnel they plan on employing.
Okay,
again,
thanks.
The last several years of physical, yeah. Do you have any public comments here in Las Vegas on specifically on regulation 5.040?
Good afternoon, Scott Rutledge on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. We did submit some pretty thorough comments to this, but wanted to highlight just a couple of items here in the meeting. Number one was the issue of the time to respond back after being contacted by the board. We've requested that go from 24 hours to 48 hours, and that apply to business days and not weekends. I think for some of the more experienced cannabis establishment business owners, they may be more, they might be used to responding quickly, but for some of the new applicants, as they're getting used to figuring out how this works, I'd like to afford them a little more time. Secondly, we also looked at the issue of what would need to happen from the time of prospective to conditional, and that 30-day windows to provide all of this documentation, extensive documentation, especially if you're talking about either, well, specifically talking about a social equity applicant. Perhaps they've started an entity, but that entity has not done any business, and they're still maybe trying to identify, quite frankly, financing. There's a couple of things. Number one, buying more time. So moving that to 90 days. And I think we could apply that across the board, but 90 days as opposed to 30 days. We know there's a real cost associated with preparing that information. And if they don't have a prospective license from the CCB because they weren't chosen in the randomization process, they may not have the wherewithal financially until such time that they at least have that quote unquote lottery ticket to then get the guarantee that they would need. This also will affect other aspects of this, such as the $200,000 requirement. We asked to waive that specifically for social equity applicants because, again, if not given a prospective license, they may not have the financial wherewithal to proceed. I will say there have been conversations, I've had several this week alone, with groups that want to provide support to those applicants in terms of either pro bono or greatly reduced fees to help them get through the initial process. But I think if we could afford them more time and again, waive that $200,000 requirement, that would be very useful. That could be addressed under 5.055, but since it's in 5.040, I wanted to bring that up here. Looking forward through the rest of this and our comments, a couple other things. Key personnel, it may be that they don't know who their team is going to be, and this could apply to anybody applying for a lounge license, especially when you talk about a dispensary operator has no experience in a running a bar or nightclub type environment. Their key personnel at their retail store may not be the same personnel that they're going to use for that type of business. Also, the idea that management services agreements may be part of these new license types, again, because retail stores, I'll point on those specifically, don't have the same level of experience in providing a bar and nightlife experience versus a retail experience. So again, looking at being able to list what those positions will be, or an MSA is being entered into, versus specifically listing the names of the individuals who probably haven't been hired yet. And there's a few other things through here. Again, we wrote these into this, but I'll hold off for now. We'll probably be submitting additional written comments. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jim Lewis. I'm a land use lawyer with the City of Las Vegas. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the work. Sorry for getting up early. I had the pages in the wrong order. I was just going to comment very briefly on 0403. This talks about specifically when you come, what you must receive before you get final licensure. And 3A says the cannabis establishment is in compliance with the zoning and land use rules adopted by the local government, which the establishment will operate. We would like to just let you know that we're going to talk to the board and your staff more about maybe changing the language a little bit. I'm nervous that we might get in an argument with applicants about whether they're in compliance with our rules or whether they've received the appropriate approvals from the city or a jurisdiction. So my only comment is we'd like to continue to have that conversation with your folks. Thank you.
Any more public comment down here in Las Vegas? Any public comment on proposed regulation 4.040 up in Carson City?
Good afternoon. For the record, Marla McDade Williams with Strategies 360. So I did jump the gun when I got up earlier. I think the confusion lies in the fact that you're appearing to repeal provisions of 5.040 through 0.060. And in repealing that, making substantial changes to the rest of the licensure process for all cannabis licensees. So again, that's the reference back to NRS 678B280, which requires the board to enact regulations related to the criteria of merit, which based on the red deletions, it appears that those sections are being repealed. We do have concern about where the 30% measure comes from and how it was determined. And I did hear earlier at the CCB, but think that that should have a little bit more input, open discussion, because it's a very broad and substantial change. On 5.40 sub 3, we feel that 12 months may be too tight of a window. As you know, some jurisdictions have lengthy entitlement and or business licensing processes and site development, especially if you're doing ground up development, and it may be difficult to open under the deadline, and then licensees would be asked to come back for an extension. Also, during an app, there's portion stating during an application period for a cannabis establishment license, a person may apply for one license of the type of cannabis establishment license that has an open application period. The way it's written, this appears to prevent applicants in future licensing rounds from applying for any more than one license. This language should either be limited to consumption lounges or limited to one application per license type per jurisdiction. Overall, we're not sure why this language is being rushed to apply to all licenses. It seems like it would make more sense to limit to consumption lounges and evaluate the licensing process for lounges once completed before adopting these regulations for all licenses. Thank you.
Any more comments of Carson City?
That's it.
Though we're not going to have back and forth. I just want to point out some of these requirements that are in here are because they are statutorily required, is why they're in these regs. We have to ask for this information. It is required in the statutes. All right, we'll move on to the rest of the changes in the application process in Reg 5. 5.050. I'd like to specifically highlight this is a new requirement that would require the board to issue 30% of all licensing rounds to minority-owned or female-owned businesses. 30% comes from many nationwide and federal procurement standards. This will help ensure we are focusing and implementing legislative mandates given to the board to ensure an increase in diversity among cannabis owners and operators.
Mike. So I'm just going to add a little bit to the record. I think now is probably the appropriate time. This is basically would be a companion regulation to the proposed changes to the regulation that were on the board meeting earlier today regarding diversity applicants and diversity certification. There were some comments brought up at today's board meeting on the process, how it could be prohibitive, and certainly appreciate those comments. The board did not decide to move forward, at least today, on the diversity application, but it's important just to put on the record, the reason for a certifying agency is really to protect, not only protect and maintain a high level of diversity or try to include some more diverse candidates, but also protect against individuals who may misrepresent the status of their business. And so utilizing a certifying agency takes that out and certainly takes us as any kind of decider or ranker out of that equation. It was brought up today about the cost of getting certified. And the costs, they range from a few $100s up to, I believe, $1,000. And it's dependent on the size of a company. So I certainly understand that there's costs involved in that. Member Durrett put on the record, it would be great if we could find a mechanism to somehow on the back end reduce some kind of licensing fee for that. Obviously, we may not be able to do that with statute now, but it's something that we could look at, and I think it's a smart idea. But I just, I think it's important to talk about the reason that's in there, the reason we would use a certifying entity. And again, it's from our perspective, more to protect that program. The 30% that's in here, that's not required by statute, right? But this 30% is something that staff feels very strongly about. That ensures that we have diverse candidates in. There's 10 independent licenses for the lounges only. There's 10 independents. There's 10 social equity. So this is different than social equity. Social equity applicants get 10, and then there's 10 independent. For us to put a number, whether it's 30% or another number after we have discussions, that is proposed by us to ensure that we're going to have diverse applicants and diverse ownership in the industry. And if it becomes a practice that we utilize in future licensing rounds, fantastic. That means all future licensing rounds are going to guarantee we're going to get more diverse ownership in the industry. And that's the reason for that. So I'll kick it back to you, Deputy Director Miles, I think it was open to any questions from board members before we open this one up, right, for public comment?
No, we were going to continue on with the rest of Reg 5, so you can continue on. You wanted to discuss the social equity
Okay, great.
regulation.
Then I'm going to stop though on that, just if there's any board member who has any questions on the diversity portion, just because it came up today at the board meeting.
This is Member Drett. I'm just bringing this up now in case this is timely now. I do agree with the comments. I know that this is now kind of becoming a broken record, but I agree with the comments that licensing other than consumption lounges should be dealt with separately than the consumption lounge discussion, because I think we need to have a more thorough policy discussion on licensing apart from licensing of consumption lounges. So where they do overlap, I agree with the comments that future licensing should be taken separately from consumption lounge licensing. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to continue on then. I'm going to take 5055. This deals with the selection of social equity applicants, and I look forward to good feedback from the public on this. If you were participating or watching the subcommittees on social equity, obviously this looks fairly familiar to you. There was a lot of good discussion in that subcommittee. While this is consistent with what that subcommittee recommended, you will notice a change. We utilize here census tracts instead of zip codes, and I want to explain that a little bit. Using some of the criteria that came out of the subcommittee to identify zip codes, and you know, what we were coming up with were areas that were just simply too large and too encompassing. While you would have certainly some areas where you feel confident that that would qualify as a social equity applicant, the zip codes were so large they were including areas that most definitely should not be considered a social equity applicant. So moving to census tracts, and I hope everybody has seen the methodology that was included as part of these materials, which is very important. Utilizing census tracts allows us to get a little bit more specific, right? We can get a little bit closer into the neighborhoods that should qualify as social equity applicants. Again, only as it pertains to the residency requirement. The webinar is being recorded. And so that is the major difference that you're going to see as compared to the recommendations that came out of that subcommittee on social equity. And when we say census tract, you'll see in here it's under 1 sub A, 1 sub B, sub 2. This is the census tract that has an incarceration rate in the 90th percentile at the time of the 2010 census. And we did not come up with that on our own here. This takes the place of the crime rate, which is what the subcommittee had recommended, either a high arrest rate or a high crime rate. That data at the granular level, as compared to a census tract, is simply not available. And so, and again, I'm not going to go into it because the methodology is included in this, and so we'll take any questions on that methodology. But that's where staff here was able to find that study, the analysis that was put together in conjunction with the census that identified these census tracts that talked about social mobility, and that included the incarceration rate of individuals who grew up in those census tracts, which is something that was very attractive to us. That really gave us a little bit of a deeper dive and a better analysis of the actual area. And if we're talking about an area that was disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, it's that social mobility piece that was most attractive to us. And that's why it is as it sits now. And again, as further explained in those back materials. Everything else is fairly straightforward. And again, fairly consistent with what the subcommittee on social equity put forward. So with that, and I think we can probably, Michael, lump 5.060 into this. It's fairly straightforward. And so I think we can probably take any kind of public comment or questions from the board first, and then any public comment on the remainder of Regulation 5 as it pertains to the application.
Do we have any questions from the board? Do we have any public comment down here in Las Vegas?
You said census tract. That's one. What was the other one that you decided to not use, or is this the only way that you were looking to for the social equity applicants? I mean, I'm just wondering why you didn't use demographics as opposed to the census, because demographics, as far as certain communities, you would probably have a general idea of who's unable to get into this type of program, and look at how many people, as far as that community or those demographics are concerned, and who wants to get in this type of business and who qualifies and who can meet all of these, I guess I would say, licensing backgrounds and all of that.
Sure. Well, thank you for your comments. And if you want to provide any future comments or any kind of further analysis that you do, please send that in and we will utilize that.
Any other comments here in Las Vegas?
Yeah, Scott Rutledge, our general partners on behalf of Chamber of Cannabis. To the issue of selection of diversity applicants, 5.050, we've had a few conversations, and I think for purposes of if it's truly going to allow the lounge licensing process to move forward and application process to move forward, we'd be fine to, if there was a delay on looking at this standard for all future cannabis establishment licenses, just to make sure that the lounge piece continues to move forward. It is certainly something that is important to my client, and the chamber has advocated for this quite vocally, both in the legislature and since then. But we do believe that the 30% is certainly a great number. We actually, in our written comments, suggested 50%. And when you compare that as a cannabis establishment license to the total number of cannabis establishment licenses that exist in Nevada today, it would still keep us pretty low on that list of percentage once these were granted. So we would advocate, we put this in writing, but I wanted to say it again today, for at least 50% of those independent cannabis establishment licenses, lounge licenses, be considered for diversity applicants. And then secondly, we made a note on 5.055 considering social equity applicants, and this was born out of one primary consideration, and that was if there are not enough social equity applicants that have resided in one of these census tracts in Nevada in the past 5 years that apply or qualify, had the board considered looking at other states with a social equity definition that would meet the same rigorous standard and definition of Nevada's social equity definition, and allow them to apply, as long as the board could certify that they were raised at least and lived in a social equity tract, census tract in another community, and then had the same type of requirements for social equity in that cannabis, specifically cannabis markets. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Katrie Saunders. I'm speaking in regards to social equity. I've been a longtime patient advocate activist in Las Vegas. I got into the medical cannabis industry because I got sexually assaulted getting my meds off the street back in 2006. In 2008, I decided to start helping people get legal on our state program in Nevada. I helped sign up over 800 people before I got indicted under Operation Chronic Problem after I asked President Obama about medical cannabis patients' rights. From that day on, my life has been turned upside down, not only at a state level, but also at a federal level. After getting out of prison and not snitching on over 800 patients that I signed up, knowing full well that those patients and probably people that I had signed up to get on the state program are fully active in Nevada's state medical cannabis program and retail cannabis. After I got out of prison, I helped with Vote 2, and I opened a couple of dispensaries. After working about 2.5 years, they changed the law to exclude felons from working in the industry. For the past 3 years, I've been speaking out on social justice issues when it pertains to getting justice. I get looked the other way. They put a 10-year clause in there to exclude felons from working in the industry. After I made hundreds of millions of dollars for the states and local business owners, I find myself now homeless and displaced. So when you guys put a clause in there for residency requirements, I don't have that because I've been homeless. So how am I supposed to prove residency requirements on being homeless, as well as not even being able to make a minimum wage of $15 an hour in the industry because of the state law being changed after we went from medical to retail? So I'm asking that this also be rectified when you guys are discussing social justice and real social equity, that you guys are including people at a federal level that have been affected by the war on drugs. Not a lot of people even get a chance to get back in the industry. I was lucky because there happened to be a loophole that stated if you were convicted by any other entity other than the state of Nevada, that you could have your card. I don't know why that was changed after, because I have dedicated my life and sacrificed my children, my time, my energy, and watched people make hundreds of millions of dollars. I watch advocacy groups lobby to raise money to pay local legislators, and there's still not rules and regulations put up in place for people to make money and generational wealth that have been affected by the war on drugs. I'm hoping that you guys fix this in this legislative session with a special session. I'm calling Governor Sisolak. I've written to him. I've written to Steve Yeager. I've even written to the CCB in regards to this. All I get is look the other way, and you guys find other Black activists that look like they could play the part and do what you guys are advocating for. When I worked at the Source Nevada, they were already building out for consumption lounges. Only in the guise of social justice issues that you guys added social equity on top of the lounges, not addressing that there's a disparity in ownership between women and minorities, and that needs to be addressed as well. And then you guys are asking for these high fees when you guys have applications. If anybody has just been affected by the war on drugs, no one has $200,000 liquid assets just sitting around in their bank account. Like me, I'm homeless. I still advocate for over 40,000 prisoners that are affected by the war on drugs. My friend Edwin's been in prison for over 24 years for a nonviolent medical cannabis conviction. I write to prisoners, I do advocacy because I know what it feels like to be in their shoes and then have nobody listen to them and think that nobody cares about them because they don't have a voice. When I spoke out about these things to Tick Sayerbloom, he told me I was a nobody and that I had no voice and that I wouldn't be listened to. And the best I could hope for was maybe a lounge when I was asking to regards to what about all the things that I've done and helped in the industry. It's really disrespectful and disgraceful to me and my family. My mom's house got raided by the DEA. I've also been affected by the war on drugs when I was 12. My father got set up by the DEA for a small amount. So when you guys are making these rules and regulations, you guys should really ask people who have been affected by the war on drugs at a state level and a federal level to actually have input on making the laws so that they're more friendly to us and we don't have to keep struggling when we've already been fighting a war. Thank you for your time today.
Chris Anderson on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. We submitted a comment on Regulation 5.50 about selection of diversity applicants. I think it's just a clarification based on some of your comments today, but just we clarifying that this is for application periods moving forward, not retroactive, and then also hoping to exclude consumption lounges attached to sales facilities from the standard, since, I don't know if we should be relitigating who should currently have a sales facility license. So that was the intent of our comment. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Any other public comments here in Las Vegas? All right, any public comments in Carson City?
Hello. So, love the mic. Will Adler representing White Pine County and Silver State Government Relations again. Just to comment on 5.50, because again, kind of in between the two sections here, I do believe, and I want to reiterate what I think Member Tourette said. That I think there does need to be two separate application processes. The legislature did mandate and sort of put all these requirements on lounges and what lounges will be, what their applications will be going forward. But this does change, similar to what I think Marla Williams said, all applications going forward and all things, maybe even retroactively backwards, as Chris Anderson was saying. So there should maybe be two processes: a starting of the normal application process, right? That sort of has been paused for a long time now. Get those regs reiterated, and then do a separate new set of regulations for what lounge applications look like. And I think that would clarify a lot of the differences between the two there. Thank you.
Any other public comment in Carson City?
That's it.
Um, I would like to, I guess, point out, since the CCB has been formed, there has been no regulations set aside for application process for any type of licenses. This is the first application process is being put forward under the CCB.
So I think we can move on then to agenda item number 3.
Right. Under this is the actual regulations that we're going to use to govern cannabis consumption lounges. There's a lot of regulations that's touched. A lot of it is housekeeping. We just had to add the terms into a lot of the individual regulations. Again, we're going to start off with the proposed change to NCCR Regulation 1, which is the definitions section. This is an update to the definitions section that adds definitions of single-use and ready-to-consume cannabis products. Again, this is 1.197 and 1.222. Do we have any questions on these definitions from the board? Do we have any public comment on these specific regulations from Las Vegas? Do you have any public comment on these specific regulations in Carson City?
No comments in Carson City.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to NCCR Regulation 4, which is our disciplinary and hearing process regulation. This is an update to the civil penalty portion of NCCR Regulation 4, adding violations to Category 3, 4, and 5 violations. And again, this is regarding the new requirements for the consumption lounge regulations. They're pretty straightforward. They come almost directly out of Reg 15. Do we have any questions from the board on the changes to NCCR Regulation 4? Do we have any public comment here in Las Vegas on the changes to NCCR Regulation 4?
Scott Rutledge again, our gentleman partners on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. I apologize. Is it possible? I'd like to just provide one comment on Regulation 1 real quick, and that was the definition of single-use cannabis product. We did submit in writing the idea that a single-use cannabis product would need to be a 0.5 gram of usable cannabis, and we were asking for that to be increased to 1 gram of usable cannabis for flower products in particular, given that most of the pre-roll products that are on the marketplace today are larger than a 0.5 gram or contain more than a 0.5 gram of flower. I'm sure there are others with opinions about that. And then under category section 4, under violations, there were 2 things that jumped out. Number one, changing the word intoxication to overconsumption. This will obviously apply in terms of operations, but it first shows up here in violations. We're concerned because anybody who consumes any amount of cannabis, it's an intoxicant, will be intoxicated. And so for purposes of clarity and trying to address what we're trying to get at, which is overconsumption, looking at that definition change. And then additionally, number 32, failing to maintain a separate room in a cannabis consumption lounge for smoking. Again, it's the first mention, so I wanted to say it here. We'll probably say it again. There was no mention of bifurcating smoking of cannabis at all during the legislative process. It doesn't exist in AB 341. I know we talked about sending things to the regulatory board to look at this, and obviously the workshops that took place and the process through the subcommittees that addressed this looked at this idea of separation of smoking from the rest of the venue. And just wanted to say that we do not believe that there should be any requirement to separate smoking, that should be left to a business choice. In fact, some of these cannabis lounges that open up very well might not want to allow for smoking. And one way they do that is by not selling that product in their venue. It could be a restaurant or a bar where only beverages are consumed. But the idea of requiring a separation of smoking from any other type of cannabis consumption, we strongly oppose that. Thank you.
Lake Martin from the NDA. Most of this has been addressed in our written comments, so I've been trying not to repeat here, but I wanted to pop up and comment on something that wasn't in our written comments, which is subsection 29. Certainly there's an interest in preventing the removal of any single-use cannabis products from the lounge, but because there's the potential for consumers to maybe hide a product or something like that, it could be altered to have the policy or the violation not having a policy to prevent the removal of any single-use cannabis product versus anytime a consumer potentially sneaks out with something, the lounge would be in violation. Again, and seconding the overconsumption in subsection 30 and the smoking rooms in subsection 32. Thanks.
Chris Anderson on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. We suggested a change to regulation 4.060, number 10, regarding water service. And that was a simple change to offer rather than provide. Clarifies that water service would be offered and readily available, which we strongly support, but just changing that word, we feel would mitigate waste and, kind of eliminate the concept of congested water areas, during a pandemic. Just a small change to clean up that section. Thank you very much.
Any other public comments here in Las Vegas? Any public comments up in Carson City?
Thank you. This is Marla McDade Williams with Strategies 360. I would concur with the previous comments that on 1.222.5 grams is too low. It should be 1. In 4.050, recommend eliminating the language about having separate rooms required for smoking, vaping, and inhalation, and suggest that the regulations mirror the Clean Indoor Air Act in that regard. And finally, in 4.05030, again, if those standards could be aligned more along the lines of liquor overconsumption in bars and hotels, as opposed to how it reads now. Thank you.
That's it for the public comment in Carson City.
Thank you. I'll move on to NCCR Regulation 5. Again, this is just a housekeeping change, adding consumption lounge to the regs, as well as adding it to agent cards. We also added receiver agent cards. The regs involving receivers are still being drafted, but we do have receivers in the industry, so we just added it into this category. And this is a very short housekeeping section.
I'm just going to add in sub J of 5.100, you'll see the failure to adhere to local requirements. And I just want to explain a little bit that it's come from a couple of the issues that have come up. Board members have expressed concerns just about lapses in local requirements and zonings and approvals and active SUPs, et cetera, business licensing at the local level. And, absent a better way to get immediate notification of that, ensuring that that remains not only for consumption lounges, but for all the licenses. So I just wanted to add that context for that.
Do you have any questions from the board on NCCR Regulation 5? Do we have any public comments here in Las Vegas to the changes to NCCR Regulation 5? Any public comments in Carson City to the change to NCCR Regulation 5?
No public comments in Carson City.
Great. We'll move on to Regulation 6. Again, this Regulation 6 has housekeeping sessions where we just had to add in the term consumption lounges in various places. However, 6.072 is an update to the required training for lounges. It gives it a little extensive list and required time for training. 6.080 subsection 3 is directly from AB 341, which requires lounges to buy its products directly from a dispensary. Again, that's a statutory requirement. 6.085 is an update to the security regulations, which extends to all license types. It does not become effective until next August, August 2022, so everyone can get their systems updated appropriately and the information submitted appropriately. Do we have any questions from the board on the changes to NCCR Regulation 6? Do you have any public comment here in Las Vegas to the changes to NCCR Regulation 6?
Chris Anderson on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. We had a requested change to Regulation 6.085, Section 3.6, under the method for storing video recordings. We request deletion of the last line of that paragraph, that a blank portable external drive must be available. And that's simply due to the impracticable nature of having an external hard drive for that purpose. The amount of data, especially for a larger facility, it's just too much data. We're not aware of hard drives that even exist to have to store that amount of data. So thank you for considering that.
Good afternoon, Executive Director Cannabis, distinguished board members. My name is Paul Michael Burgess. I'm a business owner of Lick Games Lounge here in Las Vegas, Nevada. My question is to the, it says that you have to directly buy your cannabis from a dispensary. I think that leaves out technology. I am a software designer. I design software and other technology. There's other ways I'm sure that you wouldn't know about. There's innovation that would allow for BYOC, bring your own cannabis, that will still allow the state to gather data and still a potential consumption lounge to be able to know whether that cannabis that is being brought is legal from a legal dispensary or illegal products. Just wanted to bring that to the board's attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comments here in Las Vegas on Regulation 6? Any public comments in Carson City on Regulation 6?
Marla McDade Williams.
And can I just ask, Ms. Williams, if you could indicate which licensee you are speaking on behalf of, that would be helpful, and appreciate that in Las Vegas as well.
Yes, thank you. Hold on. Thrive, the source. I'm sorry, I wrote it down and I left it in my car, but I'm happy to disclose that, Director Klimas, at conclusion.
Okay, thank you.
So on Regulation 6.072(7)D, we feel like language requiring seizing all business operations just because law enforcement, firefighters, or EMS arrive on site is excessive, and would ask for some consideration of revising that section. On 6.075(1)A(6), again, this is somewhat consistent with other operations. It feels like cannabis is being singled out to disclose health risks that are present in other occupations, but not necessarily required disclosure. So we would ask for consideration of that section. 6.08533, upon request, is removed from this section, but not from 4. In 6.08536, feel that this is, again, unreasonable, consistent with the comments before, that the amount of storage required to provide 30 days of coverage for all cameras in a facility is extreme and may not even be feasible to put on a portable HDD. On 6.08510, I feel like the language leaves too much room for interpretation. On 6.08511, the same feedback as for 6.072, that the language is excessive and may have unintended consequences of causing establishments to not call for emergency services when needed due to the drastic impact to operations. Thank you.
That's it for the comments in Carson City.
Thank you. I will move on to SCCR regulation 10 and 11. We're just going to lump those together. So again, those are purely housekeeping changes. They just added cannabis consumption lounge, where cannabis production facility, cannabis distributor, all that is listed. Is there any questions by the board regarding NCCR 10 and 11? Is there any public comment here in Las Vegas on NCCR regulation 10 or 11? Is there any public comment in Carson City on NCCR regulation 10 or 11?
No public comment in Carson City.
Excellent. We'll move on to regulation 12. This regulation has also had some housekeeping additions where we just added in the name of Cannabis Consumption Lounge. However, it also includes an establishment's ability to submit labels in an electronic format instead of on paper. It also updates the warning language that must be included on all labels. Do we have any questions from the board on NCCR regulation 12?
So I'll provide a little more feedback as well. When we say electronic medium, and certainly want the feedback as part of this, but we envision something like an email, or a text message. You make the purchase, you've sent, you provide your email address, and you can get that, on your device or some other ways. But trying to stay with the times, provide the flexibility. Obviously, we've captured the most important parts on the packaging. But for the labels, certainly there's been feedback on the necessity of long labels that are printed out and what comes as a result of that. So that is the reasoning and background behind now providing, as you see, not only for consumption lounges, for that electronic medium.
And do we have any questions from the board on NCCR regulation 12? Do you have any public comment here in Las Vegas on NCCR regulation 12?
Chris Anderson on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. As I mentioned in my first comments, we don't get an opportunity to agree with you, so I'm just going to come up and say thank you very much for adding those provisions about electronic means. They get piggybacks on some of the cleanup in the delivery space. We just want to thank you for all that thoughtful consideration. Thank you.
I'm Andy Hidalgo with Aether Gardens. I just have a question about, or actually not really a question, a comment about the single serving. Just knowing I work with a lot of concentrates, and I know that the weight of the concentrate often changes depending on the environment that it's in. And being that it would be a 10 milligram single serve, I can't see that we would be able to weigh that out. And if it sat over time, it would stay that amount of weight by the time it is consumed. So I just see if we could change it to where certain products could be weighed out at the point of the consumption or the sale, so that way you're accurately dosing and giving the consumers what they're looking for. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other public comment here in Las Vegas on regulation 12? Any public comment in Carson City on regulation 12?
There's no public comment in Carson City.
Then we'll move on to the meat of the topic. This is a brand new regulation, NCCR regulation 15. It's a completely new regulation defining the requirements that will govern consumption lounges. One area that I would like to point out, let me see, it's a very important component of all these regulations is the prevention of overconsumption. It is the reason why we are stressing the training requirements of lounge agents. It's why we are pushing patrons to make purchases in a way that require more interaction with the lounge agents. Also, another important area is Reg 15 point. I'm going to go through each one, but Reg 15.075. This doesn't allow a patron to leave the lounge with unused product. Again, this is in here because it is an absolute statutory requirement by AB 341. But let's go through each individual one. Again, 15.010 is pretty straightforward. It's just requirements for operation, posting hours of operation. 15.015 is the duties of cannabis establishment agent before sale to a consumer. Again, 15.020, just the valid proof of identifications of age of the consumer that is required. 15.025, the prohibition on a single sale that exceeds maximal usable quantity of cannabis. I would like to point out, because I think we received a couple of comments on this, is that this isn't an absolute limit of what you can buy in there at one time. You can make repeated purchases. Just make sure that's clear. 15.030, products required to be offered for sale, restrictions on sale of other products, and restrictions on advertising. 15.035 is the storage and location of products, disclosure of cannabis testing facility performing quality assurance tests. Move on. 15.040, as we get this, a few more newer things, is on-site requirements to operate a cannabis consumption lounge. This again requires certain food handling requirements and certain logs that must be taken. 15.045 is employee training and consumer education. Again, requires the various training to be conducted under 6.072 and requires written plans and instruction on how to address certain scenarios. 15.050 is the requirement that you maintain a separate room for cannabis, smoking, vaping, and inhalation. Again, I know this was proposed by the Subcommittee on Public Health. Again, I think it was mostly to protect employees and those that don't wish to smoke from secondhand smoke. 15.055 is the ventilation requirements of the cannabis consumption lounge. 15.060 is notices and additional disclosures that must be posted in the cannabis consumption lounge. 15.065 is the prohibition of the sale of tobacco and nicotine products. 15.070 requires the reporting to the board on all medical incidents that happen at the lounge. And again, these are medical incidents stemming from the consumption of cannabis. 15.075, the reg I just mentioned earlier about leaving with unused cannabis. And again, not allowed to do that. That's right out of statute. 15.080 discusses impaired driving. The cannabis consumption lounge must create a plan to mitigate the risk of impaired driving. And it gives a few suggestions on things to do. 15.085, it's a law enforcement temporary closure of licensed operations. Again, this is something that happens everywhere anyway. If a major crime happens in a facility, guess what? That facility gets shut down for a while they're investigating. It happens everywhere. That's literally all this is. 15.090 talks about the visibility of actual consumption and limits the visibility of actual consumption. 15.095, we just talked about water service, and the water service shall be provided and free of charge to all consumers. 15.100, there's a requirement that lounge licenses that are attached to sales facilities. 15.105 discusses the requirements of ready-to-consume cannabis products. And again, this is where we're talking about restaurants and preparing products on site that have THC within them. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on real quick, Director Clemens?
Sure, thanks. A couple additions here, mostly for context. Clark County, I believe, submitted some great comments before the meeting on ventilation. This was a starting point. but certainly just want to put for the record, appreciate what they submitted. Something that I look forward to discussing internally and having even future discussions here on the ventilation. Obviously, it's something new. These aren't just cigar bars. They're a little more than that. And so we'll have more conversation on ventilation requirements and also utilizing the local jurisdictions to ensure that ventilation is being properly implemented and checked as well. A couple of things that popped out to me as well. I just, when we talked about, and I appreciate the clarification on the usable cannabis that you can buy at a certain time. There may be some clarifications around purchase points that will help clarify what the regulation itself. But, the reason these limits are in there, and Chief Cronkite, you certainly correct me if I'm wrong. I believe there's a stat that says, right, for edible purchases, 80% of the time, or 80% of the sales are to first-time users, right?
That's correct.
No, I did get it right, shockingly. But so this allows us, and you certainly understand that 10 milligrams of THC means something very different to every single individual, but allowing us to have some kind of protection as we start down this road. Lastly, I guess I'd point out with some of these, the regulations like 040 that talks about food service. We've aligned a lot of these with the FDA requirements. We talk about, food handler cards. This is very consistent with how things operate now in food establishments. Some counties or some local jurisdictions offer it, some don't. So we certainly want to provide for other opportunities, but feel like obviously it needs to be a requirement. I think with that, I'm done with my additions.
Great. Hey, do we have any questions from the board on NCCR Regulation 15? Okay, do we have any public comments here in Las Vegas on Regulation 15?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Christopher Laporte for the record, representing Reset Management. I think you're going to hear this over and over again. I did both provide written comments. I just want to echo the sentiment. The Clean Indoor Air Act, the intention was for families and children people under 21 to be away from the exposure of secondhand smoke. 5 years after that was passed, an amendment was signed that allowed bars and taverns to, do what they do as business today. They lost tens of millions of dollars during that time frame. I feel that if we do this separate thing today, we're simply setting ourselves up for a change 5 years from now. When we look at social equity applicants to ask them to spend even more money to get these things open, there's plenty of technology from the ventilation side of things that we can make this a very safe environment and properly manage it operationally. We should be better than making an aquarium fishbowl kind of concept. Thank you.
No, really quick, and again, you can have a seat. I'm not commenting on any individual, right? Because I did mean to bring this up, and I think Director Cannabis probably did too, and we didn't talk about it. When we are talking about these smoking rooms, we're not talking about little fish bowls. You can have 75% of your facility can be the smoking room. I mean, 80% of the facility depends on how you want to set it up. So it's not talking about you have to have these little pods where people can go smoke. This can be a majority of your facility. We just want to have some. I think the subcommittee's idea was to have some place where employees could be without having to be sitting in secondhand smoke their entire shift. That's all. Any other comments?
Scott Rutledge, Argentum Partners on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. I appreciate that clarification, Deputy Director Miles. And one of the concerns as it relates to the smoking indoors is the idea that there would be a requirement that employees wear a mask or respirators. Obviously, COVID's changed a lot of things. I haven't been out to eat and seen someone working in an establishment without a mask for quite some time. Hopefully, we get ahead of this, and at some point, by the time these lounges start to open, masks are not required. That being said, I'll be able to then go to a casino, resort, or a tavern, or any other place where tobacco is consumed, smoked, and I can guarantee you my cocktail server, bartender, whomever will not be required to wear a mask where smoke is consumed. from tobacco products. And so I think that if an employee chooses to wear that sort of protective gear, that certainly should be their choice. But to require all employees in a post-mask world that we hopefully will be living in sometime soon, of cannabis establishment employees, I think is going a bit too far. Certainly, if an employee wants to wear one, understood. Secondly, if 75%, let's say, or 90% of that facility is allowing smoke to be products to be smoked, then the idea that the employees would have to rush in, provide a product, and get out of there as if they're on some timer, right? This idea that things would be, someone was telling me, it's like when you used to go to the bank and put the deposit in through the vacuum tube, are we going to be sending, joints through tubes because we're worried about the employees? I think there's sort of a bigger question of when people apply to work at a cannabis lounge, presumably they understand cannabis will be smoked at that lounge and that they're making a choice to work there. And so I think making these requirements as in other than business choices, or that it'd be a conversation between the employer and the employee. I think some of the recommendations from the Public Health Committee certainly opened our eyes to the idea of when we talked about this process during the legislative process, this concept, and we said we want ventilation and you want to make sure that we can do everything we can. I think the idea was to try to inform that the space could be, we could do better in terms of how these things are built out and moving the air, et cetera. But to go to the point of requiring masks or making it so that we're treating cannabis secondhand smoke differently than we treat tobacco smoke in places where tobacco is allowed to be consumed, that is challenging for the chamber and a lot of the folks that we're talking to and our membership. Additionally, I think you guys have done a pretty incredible job going through and creating this new regulation. And as Mr. Anderson said, we don't get a chance to say thank you enough when we're up here, but we really do appreciate it. And certainly we've submitted a number of written comments, but I had to come up and at least highlight again that one issue of the separation. And even if we are going to require a separation, again, requiring employees to wear N95 or respirators, again, I think those should be optional and choices and business decisions. Thank you.
Hi there again, Jim Lewis from the city of Las Vegas. I may or may not have mentioned, I also give advice to our business licensing division on a regular basis. And they had one clarification and a couple of areas of interest that they would like us to bring up. The first is a clarification to 15015-3D. This has to do with the destruction of unconsumed cannabis in a lounge. And they're a bit worried about diversion of that which is left over. And they would like to see a clarification in the regulations regarding the method of destruction. If we can maybe talk about a state-approved method of destruction. We probably already have methods of destruction available, but just to leave it to the individual licensee as to how to destruct or to destroy some unused cannabis makes our business licensing division just a touch uncomfortable. So if we could just continue to have that conversation, we would appreciate that. Also, there are two areas of interest. With regard to 15.030 sub 1, this might be the first time that the CCB has directly addressed industrial hemp in any of its regulations. I may be wrong about that, but I think this is the first time. With regard to industrial hemp, there are no regulations regarding packaging, labeling, testing of THC levels in our regulations. If we are going to now allow industrial hemp to be sold and consumed in a lounge, we would just like to suggest that maybe the board think about some regulation, at least so the consumer will know that this is hemp, under 0.03 THC, and have a label on it which indicates it is hemp. We have received some unconfirmed complaints by some consumers of hemp that they thought they were buying marijuana. So that would be the reason for that request. And then the last one is the city would just like to have, the business license division would just like to have further conversation with the staff about 15.0303 Now that's the nicotine prohibition. They'd like to talk some more about uh, that prohibition and vaping and some of the other vaping products that might be permitted. With that, the city of Las Vegas would like to thank you and your staff again for all its hard work. We really do appreciate it. If there's anything we can do, your staff is welcome to contact us. I know we'll be contacting you and your staff, so thank you very much.
So you should get a front seat there, Mr. Anderson.
Right. Okay. Las Vegas Tribune. I was kind of with you up until the moment. I do think, having worked for the United States Post Office almost 10 years of my life, I know that those 10-minute breaks and those 30-minute breaks really you get to value. So in an instance of a lounge and I don't know what do you call it, cannabis lounge, I think it's important for the employee to have this break away from it, because like you stated, intoxication, those type of words, at a certain point you become that, or you become one of the other, however you want to say it. So I think that having an employee do wear a mask, it's not only for the protection of the employee while they're at work, but when they finally get in their car and drive home, we have other citizens on the road. So I'm not saying that marijuana automatically leads to a car accident. I'm just saying, after a 6-hour shift, an 8-hour shift, and not having appropriate breaks or having an area where you can get out of this, it might save lives outside of this establishment, and it might help the employee in terms of their mental state. So I'm thinking that it's probably more appropriate to have an area allocated where they can leave outside of this smoke lounge.
Thank you.
Chris Anderson on behalf of Planet 13 Holdings. We did request a change in regulation 15.015 as well, section 2B. If we could have a further conversation about destruction of products that are sold and not entirely consumed. I don't, personally, I don't think that weighing the amount of that product is really practicable. Trying to empty out a bowl or half smoked joint or something like that. I'm just not sure that'll work. So we're in favor of having provisions for destruction in line with current CCB provisions of the like, but just somehow removing that language that maybe suggests that you have to take partially used consumed products and weigh them first before you destroy them. And we don't believe, at least, that would lead to any kind of diversion. The last quarter of a joint is not all that appealing to anyone I know. On regulation 15.055, section 6, we'd like to suggest a change to remove the word eliminate odor at the property line and change it to mitigate. We're just not sure that completely eliminating is possible. You drive by a sales facility today, and you'll see that the odor is mitigated, but not completely eliminated. Section 15.085, we feel very strongly that the board should retain ultimate authority to close a facility in the case of an emergency. Not that shouldn't be able to happen expeditiously, but we just feel like the board understands cannabis, has relationships with its licensees, and would be the best ultimate authority. And I believe that's a pretty small check for a law enforcement officer at a property to call someone from the board, a post-certified officer, and just say, hey, this is what's happening. Can we proceed with the closure? That's a small step, but an important check, I think, for licensees. Finally, in section 15.090, subsection B, we request a change in addition to that paragraph that clarifies that obscuring wall to prevent cannabis products from being transferred, that only applied to areas that are within 8 vertical feet of the surrounding area. We're envisioning elevated outdoor areas where it would just be kind of impossible to transfer illicit product, from that elevation. So we appreciate your consideration of those amendments. Thank you very much.
Any other public comment here in Las Vegas?
Scott Rutledge again, Argentum Partners on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. It's funny, I was just getting a text from one of our colleagues that is watching online, and I know that they'll appreciate this. And it's something we submitted in our written comments. We haven't really had much of a discussion about the sort of non-endemic consumer, the first-time cannabis consumer, and certainly when we're thinking about these regulations and how we can protect not only the employees, but the guests that are attending, those consumers. And I think one way these lounges work is if we're bringing in folks who maybe aren't currently consuming cannabis and they're kind of curious, whatever. And so we want to provide them a venue that they feel comfortable in. I think, again, that's going to be a business choice, but I know if I were opening one of these, I'd want to attract as many people that aren't currently using cannabis to expand the pie, right? And thinking about that, how many of the products that are made available, again, I think I use the requirement in the written, but I don't know if require is the right word. But I definitely think maybe it's part of the education and training. Maybe it's what you're looking for in SOPs, but ensuring that these businesses are offering those low dose products for those consumers. There's a new line of cannabis beverages out in the marketplace where it's 2 milligrams, 2.5 milligrams for some of those beverages, which is certainly where you want to guide a first-time consumer of cannabis or someone who hasn't had a cannabis beverage. Probably not the 100 milligram drink, and probably not even a 10 milligram beverage. So any sort of guidance or future discussion around these low dose products, how that we could use that to sort of promote the idea of having a novice or new consumer to cannabis coming in and trying the product for the first time, but not being forced to purchase something that only comes in a 5 milligram or 10 milligram dose. And so again, I don't know if it's a requirement or not, but certainly something to think about. Thank you.
Any other public comment here in Las Vegas?
Hello, how are you guys doing? My name is Gerardo Gonzalez, just representing independents, cannabis users, and consumers. I want to say thank you for having us up here and going through everything with us. Chamber of Cannabis for doing everything they did, Normal and everybody. I just feel that for employees that want to work in a consumption lounge, knowing that there will be cannabis consumption, but yet are nervous about inhaling secondhand smoke, my thing is just don't work there. If you don't want to be around alcohol, you don't work at a bar. If you have problems with alcohol, again, you don't work at a bar. Forcing people to wear the mask right now is fine because we have to, but that wouldn't be fair for everybody that works there. For minorities to get $200,000 that work at $11 an hour job or 13-hour job is very hard. So I think that $200,000 can be looked at. I do appreciate what you guys were talking about, the pro bono and finding companies that would help people do that. And that's about it. Just want to thank you for your time. A few concerns, that was about it. And thank you again. That's it.
Thanks. Any other public comments here in Las Vegas?
Hi there, my name is Amber Jansen. I just wanted to bring up one thing. I noticed that you have in your regulations that the lounges must purchase from a dispensary, which is great for the first set of lounges because they're connected to a dispensary. But why would an independent lounge need to purchase from a dispensary? A restaurant doesn't go to the grocery store, they go to a wholesaler. So why wouldn't they be able to go directly to the cultivator or the production? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment here in Las Vegas?
Hi, my name's Maritza Bermudez. I'm just here as part of an independent. One of the items that you guys brought up recently earlier was that the finalization of the licenses for the site would be 12 months. Given its COVID time and given how long it's taken some of these dispensaries even to open up, I think 12 months is way too short of a time frame. Even in discussions with folks that have an interest in doing these licenses, one of the things they brought up is, do you even know that food handlers permits licenses are taking about 6 months? So again, I just think that 12 months from the time that they need to finalize their license may be too short. So just something to consider. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comments here in Las Vegas?
That's the last one. Okay, well, if an employee decides to work at a cannabis lounge, sometimes you still have to regulate for a person who may be unaware of the health implications themselves. So an 8-hour shift or a 6-hour shift in a room full of smoke might end up being a health hazard that isn't immediately known because this is a new thing. So in order, if you find in a year or two that an employee is not intoxicated at work after an 8-hour shift, and they didn't have to take breaks or didn't have to have an area where they walk out of the smoke, then you change the statute, the law, the compliance, or whatever. But it's fairly new. So you really want to take precautionary measures because it is not only the people that are in that lounge and having a good time that may be affected by an employee walking out of there after 8 hours and being high as a kite. It may be some woman driving home, minding her business, and this employee may fall asleep or doze off, or after being maybe tired, just tired. So to protect all of us, not just the people who are going to profit, or not just the people who are going to come into Las Vegas to have a good time, but think about the citizens outside of the cannabis lounge. I have no problem with marijuana, so I don't want anyone to think that. But I am for the people, not just some people, all people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments here in Las Vegas?
Hello, my name is Katrina Saunders for the record. I just wanted to let you guys know that I did email over some recommendations as well. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments here in Las Vegas? It's got to be almost everybody, right? Any public comments in Carson City?
Thank you. Marla McDade Williams with Strategies 360. In 15.015.3, it seems that that whole section would benefit from being split up. It kind of gets a little bit confusing with the language saying that the lounge has to perform certain things before the patron is even inside the lounge. So just suggest maybe some slight revision of that to make it clearer on what's required before they enter and then after they enter, particularly with sales. In 15.025, it seems to be setting up an operational nightmare for establishments if they have to require individual transactions for each individual serving. Some lounges may want to run a tab for guests, and then how do groups looking to purchase share that? What happens if a patron purchases a product that he doesn't enjoy, and does that product have to be removed before they're allowed to purchase something else? So just some considering operational issues with that section. In 15.03.05, again, does this apply to every consumer every time they purchase? The way it's written and paired with 15.025, it seems that you would have to consult with the consumer before every single transaction. So it seems unreasonable You know, if you've talked to the patron once, do you really have to talk to them with every single transaction? It would be similar to being in a bar and asking a patron every time they order a beer, do you know that this beer may lead to intoxication? And do you understand the impacts of ingesting it? So just would look for some consideration about that section. In 150306, how will a person know if a woman is pregnant? Are they going to ask every woman that comes in, are you pregnant before selling? So it, as written, appears to impose strict liability regarding knowledge of the um, uh, employees of the establishment. So would ask for some consideration of how to rewrite that section, letting women know that it's not recommended. But again, you know, how far do you go in terms of regulating individual behavior? In 15040, illness logs required for complaints after the fact, or is it only when something occurs inside a lounge? You know, and what if a consumer doesn't cooperate in getting the information? The lounge is held responsible for not getting information when it can, but, you know, so make it so that the lounge has policies in place to gather the information, but if a consumer doesn't want to get it, that they note that as well. In 15.050, just recommend mirroring the Clean Indoor Air Act. In 15.055.5 and 6, this seems like a very high bar to meet and maybe unreasonable. I think there was a comment earlier about making it an odor mitigation plan, not an odor elimination plan. In 15.075, what happens if a customer hides the item on the way out? I mean, I understand what the statute says. I don't think the intent of the legislature was to hold a lounge responsible for individual consumer behavior. It was meant to say, you're selling product, you inform the consumer this product can't be taken outside of the lounge, only order what you can consume during your stay here, and you are not allowed to take it out. You know, you have those policies in place, but it seems unreasonable to penalize the lounge if someone violates those policies and takes it out. And again, I don't think the intent of the legislature was to punish the lounges for behavior of consumers. And finally, in 15.100, it does not reflect the statutory language that allows for a lounge in close proximity and not directly attached to a sales facility. And thank you for your time and thank you for the opportunity to comment on these regulations today and look forward to future iterations. Thank you.
That's it for the comments in Carson City.
Right. Well, that takes us to agenda item for the last public comment period. I think that's agenda item number 4, if I can find my agenda. That's agenda item number 4, which is the last general public comment period. So we will then open it up to any general public comment here in Las Vegas.
Scott Rutledge, Argentum Partners, on behalf of the Chamber of Cannabis. Because these weren't specifically prescribed in the regulation, but I know there were some comments provided. At least I thought they were being provided. I know there probably needs to be a conversation about sanitization of equipment, things that might be used that would be reusable, like bongs or other devices. And so I expect that I know we'll be talking to some folks at the chamber on behalf of providing some input on that. And then another item, just a sort of clarification question. So some of these venues are going to serve we would assume many will serve non-infused food and beverages, like a restaurant or a bar, or you buy alcohol, but you also buy food and beverage. And I know that I've had some conversations early on and even over the summer with the health districts, at least their representatives, about inspecting those kitchens, et cetera, where non-infused things are taking place. I know that there was perhaps some reticence about being in a venue where consumption is taking place and they're trying to inspect non-infused, kitchens. And then of course, if the food is being infused, it's kind of sits on both sides. It saddles, it's food, but then the sauce you're putting on the food may be the thing that's infused. And how is that going to be handled in terms of inspections from both a food safety and cannabis safety perspective? And I don't know if that's something that we need to maybe spend a little more time thinking about from our end, of course. I know it's difficult, that's why we didn't come with answers today, but certainly something that I know we are going to be monitoring. So thank you again.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in Las Vegas wishing to provide general public comment?
Thank you, Paul Michael Burgess, Lake Games Lounge. October 3rd, I sent a NRS 68 petition to the board, certified through mail. It arrived on October 1st. Stipulations doesn't say that I'm not allowed to know if the board has received my application. It actually says that I will receive a letter letting me know that the fee would either be waived or that the fee would be $50. I have this information. It is on. I have not heard nothing from the board. Just want to make sure my petition made it to the board, even though it made it to the building. Stipulation 2, I came before the board on November 16th, talking about a public health and safety issuance by the National HHS on marijuana had its first overdose. National news on November the 22nd. Marijuana had its first overdose and many other overdoses with marijuana sold with fentanyl in it. I present this to the board because I am a software designer that has been designing software that is adverse effects of marijuana since 2017. I'm looking for the board to partner with the board with this solution. Also have a demo of this technology and hoping that we can work together to help the tourists and the customers and consumers of marijuana in the state of Nevada. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in Las Vegas? All right, we'll move on to Carson City. Is there anyone wishing to provide public comment in Carson City?
I see no public comment in Carson City.
Thank you. So we will close public comment period here today. Members of the board are joining us. Is there any final thoughts, anything that you would like to add?
This is Member Young. I just wanted to thank everyone for their participation and certainly hearing everything from the public comments and appreciate everybody's time today.
This is Member Merritt. I also would like to thank not important for us to be able to hear your voices. And thank you, staff, for the time that you have actually put into providing us the information that is much needed.
Thank you.
Me too, Member Durrett.
Thank you, Member Dredd. Well, great. Well, and then I'll pass along those thanks to everyone who participated today. We appreciate your comments, appreciate this feedback. I've got multiple pages of notes here, so we've got a lot of work ahead of us together. And so we'll look forward to the next workshop to discuss some of the changes we discussed today as we further refine the document. So thanks, everybody. Happy holidays. We'll see you next year.
Happy holidays.